One of the teams that all of us have said we're very high on is Chicago. They take on the Nashville Predators. Predators kind of had a weird season. You know, they were a team that was underachieving for a majority of the year, and then they kind of turned it on near the end. They got in the playoffs, they got a spot, and now they'll be facing Chicago, who was the best team in the West pretty much the entire year. Minnesota was right there with them, but Minnesota kind of declined at the end of the year. Chicago took their spot in that division and ended up being first place. Chicago is Chicago. The Predators have been a consistent playoff contender as well over the past few years. They did make that crazy Subban-Weber trade at the beginning of the year, and then they kind of settled themselves once they realized what their identity was with Subban, and they've gotten a lot better. Actually, Nashville could be a team, and I've seen a few different experts, quote unquote, predict that Nashville is actually going to do quite well in these playoffs because they're a team that has kind of gone, overlooked because they're a team with a lot of talent that didn't have a great beginning of the year, kind of like the Penguins last year, but we'll see what happens. Chicago, they do have, of course, the home ice advantage. So I think that is going to play a little bit into this if it does go a long ways in the playoffs because Chicago has a very good home ice advantage. But I'm just going to say that Chicago is going to win this pretty easily. I don't see Nashville putting up much of a fight. I think Chicago will win this in 5 to 6 games. Chicago is a stacked team. I think this is the best team they've had in a couple of years since they won their last cup. I think last year they kind of had a little bit of decline, but this year they got some of those young players back in the fold on their third and fourth lines where they were lacking depth last year. They got that back, and especially on their defense as well, adding a few veterans into the mix at the deadline and before the season in free agency. Chicago is a team that's all around very good, very special. They have a good goaltender, and they have the experience to beat Nashville here. Nashville will give them some troubles, especially if Rene can have a very good series. But I think Chicago is just the superior team in every facet. What do you guys think about this series?
Well, it's going to be complicated there, Mitch. I mean, I like how you said that, Rene needs to be the huge factor with Nashville. And I think that Rene, he's been dropping the ball more and more every single time that he makes the playoffs. I mean, he's really been struggling to make the postseason when this team does. I mean, they have been consistent, but they are struggling to stay in the postseason. And Pekka Rinne, he's been slowly dropping down. You see him getting more and more frustrated with himself more than at the team. Yes, they did pick up PK Subban, and yes, they did start doing better near the end of the season, but they started doing better because they were starting to get healthier. They are one of the most injured teams going into the playoffs right now with 6 injuries, and there's 6 key injuries. Injuries to Yossi, Fisher, their captain, Wilson, who's a solid player on their team. And because of that, Chicago's going to eat them alive because Chicago is healthy. As you said, they're full of depth. They have 2 great goaltenders instead of just having a Pekka Rinne. They have a Corey Crawford and a Scott Darling, who is going to eat alive the Nashville Predators. And because of that, I don't see them winning a single game. I see it being competitive games, but not winning a single game, just because Chicago has such a big drive. So I think it's going to be a 4-0 sweep for the Blackhawks.
Yeah, Trent, I'm similar to you why I like Chicago. Those injuries are key. And someone you didn't mention is Yarncroc, who has scored some goals for them and actually played quite well in playing in somewhat top 6 minutes. But at the end of the day, Chicago, this is a similar team that won the cup, but just add a Russian sniper to the mix in Panarin. Like, he looks really good. Add him. So you have 2 top 6 lines. Their bottom 6 isn't bad. And look at that push they made at the end of the season. That was with a healthy squad because you didn't have Keith a lot of the season too. And that, you need Keith in the playoffs playing 25 minutes a game. And then coming down to it, the only thing I'll think about Chicago is what are you going to get out of Crawford? Because we've seen Crawford can be really inconsistent, but we've seen Darling step up in some big games and play really well. So that's a question mark for me. I still have them going very far. I'll tease that a bit. I have them going very far. But I think it's 5 games. I just don't think Nashville has the firepower. But the one thing I'll give credit to Nashville is they had a really tough start to the season. And a guy I really like is Forsberg, who didn't have the greatest year last year, and then all of a sudden picked it up again, 30-plus goals up there in the points race. So I think he would be a big factor if Nashville indeed wants to even compete. They're going to need Forsberg, Subban playing outstanding. Plus, like you mentioned, Rene, who I don't think is as good as even 5 years ago. But at the end of the day, I'm taking Hawks in 5.
Yeah, I don't know what much more I'll add other than the Predators have the worst road record of any playoff team, and they're going into one of the toughest barns to play in the National Hockey League. I just don't think they have the depth. I think that this is where you miss a guy like Shea Weber, which we'll tease a little bit later. But I kind of see this going 5. I maybe 6, but I don't see a sweep. I do think Nashville can win 1 game, but so I'm going with the Blackhawks in 5.
Just to sum up, I said 5 or 6. What I have on my bracket is 5, so I'll pick 5 there. So yeah, we're all on the Blackhawks. We all have the Blackhawks advancing to the second round at the very least. I know Adam said that he has them going very far, as do I. But we will talk about that in a little bit.